It's football season and time for the show that examines the X's and O's of the top games for the coming weekend. It's time for the Gridiron Breakdown.
It's time for the Gridiron Breakdown. I'm Jay.
And I'm Alan.
And we are here to talk about the Big Ten tonight. Alan, Big Ten conference time. We're going to have some guests on later to talk a little Big Ten football with us. But before we get to that, you and I are going to get into the nitty-gritty. You know, a football conference that has done well by itself over the past few years. They've got a national championship. They've been a part of the playoff, but didn't make it last year. And because the top team had one of those strength of schedule losses that really hurt them, and that's Ohio State, of course, we're talking about, and they got edged out. So
you mean losing on the road by almost 30 points to an average Iowa team?
Yeah, they got blasted by the Hawkeyes, for sure. Just to run it down for everybody, the East last year was Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Rutgers, Indiana, Maryland. The West was Wisconsin, Northwestern, Purdue, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Illinois. Wisconsin was undefeated going into the Big Ten championship game, but could not close the gap. Ohio State got out to an early lead and held on to win that ball game, as they're wont to do. Ohio State has this thing, man, where they have a little bit more of explosion in their offense sometimes, but they grind teams down the way like Clemson and Alabama. Getting to the second half with them, you're going up against that depth from their defense. That's what happened to Wisconsin. That Wisconsin team wasn't shabby by any stretch.
No, I mean, Ohio State's one of the best teams in the country. They consistently are in the top 5 of recruiting. They have a great coach, Urban Meyer. I mean, Jay, over the last 5 years, they're 39-3. They don't lose many games. The problem with Ohio State, though, it seems like when they do lose a game, they lose a game that they're not supposed to. Whereas when you look at some teams like Alabama, they kind of they don't lose games that necessarily they're, not supposed to. They don't lose to Kentucky or to Vanderbilt or
I don't know.
something
You
like that.
Lost twice to Ole Miss, so I don't know. So.
Hey, now those were Ole Miss super teams, the best teams money could buy.
Yes, indeed. As we've now seen and had through some good work. No, I think you're right. I mean, yeah, Ohio State tends to when they drop one, they usually get beat by somebody that isn't in their league necessarily, and it hurts them, and then they have to bounce back. I mean, the year they won the national championship, they lost a game before coming back and just finishing the season as strong as you can. And sometimes it's all about when you hit it just right. And looking at the Big Ten this year, I think you start by looking at Ohio State, but there's some other really good teams here. I mean, Penn State looks salty. You've got Wisconsin on the other side. Then, of course, when is Michigan not part of the story with Harbaugh?
Well, and I mean, Michigan should be poised for good things this year. I know they were 8-5 last year, but they got the transfer in Shea Patterson, which is hopefully going to fix their biggest problem, which has been offense and downfield passing. They should have a pretty solid defense. I mean, Jay, they actually only returned 6 starters last year. And I think you really saw that as things ground down in the season. And they maybe lost some games they shouldn't or let some things slip away. But, I think the pressure is on Jim Harbaugh this year. Oh, yeah. I think 3 third-place finishes in the division. A 4th one is not going to make the locals very happy.
You say that, and I almost think, though, that's media creation because – he's got 14 returning starters, but none of the specialists really are coming back. You got Higdon is coming back at running back, but none of the receiving core. The tight end's back, but he's replacing part of the line. I mean, we're kind of getting game to game into them, but I just think he's one of their guys, man. They would have to completely bottom out for him to really be on the hot seat. I almost feel like that's just message board media fodder.
You may be right. Just for what they're paying him, you would think they would expect to finally get over the hump.
I mean, hey, man, the way Dave Aranda's getting paid at LSU, if anybody scores against him, they ought to, deduct part of his salary or something.
Well, and I mean, the big thing for Harbaugh, I think more important than where he finishes, he's got to find a way to beat Ohio State sooner or later.
Oh, big time. We're getting deep into one team there, and we'll come back to that. But I want to start with the Big Ten East. So we're talking about Ohio State, Michigan, Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, Penn State. How do you see these teams finishing out in the 2018 season?
Well, my division winner is going to be Ohio State. I think they are the most talented team top to bottom. I mean, their running backs with J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber, that is one of the best 1-2 punches in the country. Dwayne Haskins, well, we haven't seen a ton of him. He seems to have all the skills and the intangibles. They may very well have the best defensive line in the country. It's probably going to be them, Clemson, or maybe Alabama in that conversation. They've got a lot of pieces back. They do have a couple of tricky road trips. They got to go to Happy Valley and they got to go to East Lansing. But they get Michigan at home and they don't really have any stretches of games. It seems like they get a tough game and then maybe they get one or two clunkers and they get another tough game and then a couple of easy teams. So, I mean, I think they are primed for big things to win the division once again. Finishing second, I have Michigan. I think Harbaugh will get things turning the corner. I think a lot of that will be due to Shea Patterson. Shea Patterson will be the best athlete he's had at quarterback since he's been there. Yes, their offensive line is a little bit of a hodgepodge, but that defense should be salty as usual. Their schedule isn't as bad as it has been in the past. They do kind of have a rough stretch there with Wisconsin at Michigan State, a bye week, and them playing Penn State. But that leads me to, kind of my next point. I kind of waffled back and forth between Michigan State and Penn State, for third in the division. And it was really tough. Michigan State, they had a bad year a couple of years ago, and last year they squeaked out a bunch of close games. And with Penn State, my question is, what are they going to do without Saquon Barkley? That dude is a beast. One of the best college running backs I've seen. I mean, he won many games for them. I think the big thing, though, is Penn State has a tougher crossover schedule. They play against Wisconsin and Iowa, and luckily they get Ohio State and Michigan State at home. But I think the loss of Barkley, the loss of Joe Moorhead and Gaddis on the coaching staff, I think that team is going to take a step back, and I think the Spartans are poised with 19 starters returning from that team to finish third. I put Penn State fourth. The rest of the division, I think Maryland may have an okay year. What I mean by that, I think Maryland probably makes a bowl this year. Last year they were decimated by injuries at the quarterback position, ended up going to their fourth string quarterback, which really, really hurt them. And then, Jay, the two bottom teams division, let's just face it, Indiana and Rutgers are not very good. Rutgers may be one of the worst two teams in all of FBS, or at least in the Power Fives. So I have Indiana finishing sixth, and I'll have Rutgers finishing dead last, and Rutgers will probably struggle to win 3 games.
Yeah, Rutgers not much of a football team anymore, but they are fine. You stole a little bit of my thunder there, talking about 19 starters coming back from Michigan State. Let me tell you what that equates to, all right? 93% of their offensive and defensive production is coming back. Bill Connolly thinks that stat. If you're not following Bill, folks, go follow Bill's best stat breakdown you can get. 93% of their production is coming back. Their schedule: Utah State, at Arizona State, at Indiana, Central Michigan, Northwestern, at Penn State. Toughest road game. Michigan, Purdue, at Maryland, Ohio State, at Nebraska, Rutgers. That is a very doable schedule with an experienced coach, an experienced team. How can I not pick them? I know Ohio State is loaded, and they're loaded to the gills, but I feel like they're going to be the team the way that, and I hate to keep using the SEC comparison, but it's just the simplest one. That 2010 Alabama team was as loaded as you could get coming off that national championship, and they screwed up. They found a way to lose a couple of games before going on a 3-year tear. And I feel like Ohio State is going to be a really good team that stumbles a couple of times along the way, and I think one of those is to Michigan State. I'm picking Michigan State to win the Big Ten East. I think they're going to get it done. I don't think they're running the table undefeated. I want to make that clear. They're going to slip somewhere along the way, but everybody below them is going to lose more than one. I think the top part of the East Division is going to beat itself up. Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan are going to have a fun round robin, but I think all but maybe one of them is going to lose to Michigan State. I think it's where Michigan State's one loss comes in. But I think Ohio State and Penn State are going to finish tied for second. I've got Michigan coming in that 4 spot, or really third, but if you want to call them 4, they're going to be there. Then Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers. Maryland, Indiana, Rutgers. Maryland should be better if they could just keep a quarterback healthy. By the end of the season, they didn't have anybody. It was like Baylor a few years. Indiana, Rutgers, just not nearly what they could be, or they're just not great programs. And let's face it, they're in an impossible division. It's really hard to do anything for them and what they can recruit for. So I'm not even really getting into them. But I like Michigan State, man. I really like Sparty to get it done this year because they've got Brian Lewerke coming back at quarterback. He's super accurate, doesn't turn the ball over a ton. They got good running backs. L.J. Scott's another one of their just load running backs and really carry the load. Doesn't score a ton because they throw the ball down in red zone situations. They've got good receivers all over the field, great offensive line. That defense, though, up front, good luck running against that butt. They are good, man. They are really, really good. Only 20 points a game allowed. That's pretty solid. Less than 95 yards a game on the ground. I like Michigan State, man. I'm taking Sparty and then I think below them you're going to have the scrum of Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. I like Michigan State, so we disagree on this one.
Well, I have to say that is one of the more gutsy calls I think I've ever had on this show with somebody winning a division. But kudos to you, Jay. I mean, those 19 starters and their schedule, it does set up well. I was, just a little worried about how things stack up above them. I know they get Penn State coming off a bye and then have to play Michigan. So they'll have to navigate that stretch. But they play good, hard-nosed football, and they're the type of team that's given Ohio State trouble over the years. A couple of years ago, they beat them with a backup quarterback, 17-14 in the shoe. So it's definitely within possibility. And like we said, sometimes, Ohio State will kind of underperform what they're supposed to. And Ohio State not having a seasoned quarterback, you don't know how he's going to react in hostile environments. So I'll give you the nod there. That was a gutsy pick, man. And, I hope you prove me wrong.
We shall see how it turns out. But I feel pretty good about the limb I'm stepping out on. We'll run it by our boys, Roger and Ben from Sports Radio Detroit later and see what they think. But I'm going Michigan State. But before we get to that, man, we got to talk about the Big Ten West. And
whoa.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the Big Ten West, which is really one team and a bunch of jobbers, right?
Not true. There are two teams in that league because every 3 years, and when the moon is right, Iowa is good. And this should be one of those years when I think they're going to be better than average. We talk about Iowa a lot as being an average team. And a lot of times they are, man. Let's face it. But they get a lot of production. They got 11 starters coming back, but for once, most of it's on offense. And they got Nate Stanley at quarterback. Super accurate. Doesn't turn the ball over. I mean, I was reading a thing in Athlon where another coach said, Nate Stanley was a real surprise. When was the last time that Iowa had a quarterback that put up those numbers without the turnover? And that's the key. Is like they don't turn the ball over a ton. They got a pretty good schedule. They get Wisconsin at home at the end of the September, so that's a tough game for Wisconsin. Then they go to Minnesota, go to Indiana, they go to Penn State and Purdue. The hardest one of those is Penn State. All right, they don't get Ohio State, they don't get Michigan, they don't get Michigan State. I think this year Iowa could be pretty good. But before I blow my Hawkeyes trump too much, I got to tell you, man, I'm going with the Wisconsin. Now, here's the thing: this team went undefeated last year. I don't think they're running that table again this year. They lost way too much on defense. They got 3 guys coming back. The good news for them is they don't really need a defense until that last game of September. They open up with Western Kentucky, New Mexico, and BYU all at home. All right, Jonathan Taylor at tailback. And if Alex Hornibrook continues to improve the way he did toward the end of last season, they should be fine. They get their whole line back except for the left tackle, and the guy stepping in for them was one of their big recruits. They're a plug-and-play kind of offense. I think Wisconsin is going to be led by their offense, oddly enough, because the way they blew Miami out in that bowl game, that wasn't Miami being bored. All right, they couldn't catch guys from Wisconsin. Let that sink in. They could not catch guys from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is not just a bunch of farm-fed, corn-eating, big, muscly guys. They're that, but they got some speed now. And again, Hornibrook has got more experience. I think he can really spin the ball. Jonathan Taylor at running back, definitely a running back that could wind up finding his way to New York by the end of the year if things go right. The problem is their defense is going to have to grow up quick, and they go to Iowa, then they get Nebraska. They got to go to Michigan. That's not an easy draw. They get Illinois, at Northwestern, Rutgers, at Penn State, at Purdue. And that Purdue game before they play Minnesota at the end of the year, that Purdue game is a sandwich. Like watch out for Braum to sneak up and grab somebody. They could stumble there. I think Wisconsin, though, all said and done, is going to be the top team out of the West again. But I don't think they're running that table. So I've got them winning it with a couple of losses. Then I've got Iowa coming in behind for the reasons I said. I think Northwestern's going to finish third. I think they're going to continue to be what they are. Pat Fitzgerald is pretty well consistently 3 to 5, sometimes 6, but he's got a pretty good team. I like Purdue coming in at 4. I like Minnesota 5th, Nebraska 6th. Going to take Frost a year or two to get things going. Then Illinois may be the worst team in the big. Yeah, Illinois makes Rutgers and Indiana look good. Illinois is not good. I love Lovie Smith, but that's a bad situation up there. Illinois is coming in last. So I've got Wisconsin, Iowa, Northwestern, Purdue, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Illinois. But I'm going with the Mesa Badgers.
All right, and I'm going to follow you on that. I think Wisconsin has been too consistent for too long. I think that they are what they are. I think you can expect about 10 wins a year out of them. That offense is something to be had. They have probably the best offensive line in the entire country. They have a great running back. Jonathan Taylor had a phenomenal, kind of got lost in the mix of the Bryce Love Fest, and some other things that went on around the country. One of the top running backs there is out there. Hornibrook progressed as the season went along, and I think their schedule sets up nicely. Yeah, they got some tough road games, but Wisconsin is built as a team that this year, Jay, they can throw the ball, they can run the ball. Their defense is going to be questionable. I guess the good thing for them is a lot of the teams they're going to play maybe aren't explosive offensively. Iowa may be able to be explosive at times. Penn State probably will with Trace McSorley. We've yet to see how the Shea Patterson experiment works in Ann Arbor. But, Wisconsin, they've been the cream of the crop in the West for several years since they realigned the division. I don't think that changes. To go second, you throw out the every 3 years when the moon is right. If you hold your tongue just right, Iowa wins 10 games. Iowa's consistent. You can expect 8 wins from them, 9 wins. Every so often they're going to go to a Rose Bowl. But I'm going to stick with Iowa to finish second just because I can't pull the trigger on Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern to finish second in that division. Iowa will be solid. They did lose some talent to the draft. But their schedule sets up nice. They avoid Ohio State and they avoid Michigan. So their crossover games aren't that bad. They got some tough road games. They got to go to Penn State. The question is, how good is PJ Fleck going to move things along in Minnesota? I know they've lost a lot. So I have Iowa finishing second. I'll take Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald to finish third. Fitzgerald has done a great job at Northwestern. They're consistent. I think when I look at Northwestern, Jay, I see 7-8 wins a year. They're probably going to make a bowl game. This year, their schedule maybe isn't as advantageous as it has been. They get Michigan and Michigan State on back-to-back, and then they get Wisconsin and Notre Dame and Iowa back-to-back. So that'll be a tough part of the schedule for them to navigate. After that, I think Nebraska could tie for fourth, but I'm going to go Purdue. I think Braum having one year under his belt, I think he's going to move that program in the right direction. Good enough to make a bowl and probably finish fourth. I'll take Nebraska to finish fifth. I think Frost will energize that program. I'm just not sure that they got the horses. And then rounding out the bottom, I'm going to have Minnesota with P.J. Fleck in his second year, and Illinois and Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith will probably be fired. Not that it matters. I think, you could probably put Nick Saban in Illinois and he would have a hard time winning. You could dig up the bones of Vince Lombardi and he may not be able to make it work in Champaign. But let's be honest. This division is about the top 2 teams, Iowa and Wisconsin. Who's going to challenge the East in that Big Ten championship game? This division is very weak at the bottom.
You really have 2 teams that have stood out, and you've got some good up-and-coming teams. Northwestern, again, well, they're not really up-and-coming. They're kind of consistently right there in the middle. But you've got teams like Purdue and Nebraska with a lot of upside. Minnesota might have that, but it's going to take a little while to get the boat to float a little faster, to borrow the pun. And like we said, Illinois is just bad. Look, here's the problem with Illinois. If you don't have good players, I don't care who you coach it. And they can't get good players. Just can't get them for whatever reason. And that's amazing because that area's got some good football, but it's all getting ripped off by Michigan, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Ohio State. All those teams are just raiding them, and there's not enough to go around. So they're losing out. So you've got Wisconsin winning the West as well as I. So that puts our Big Ten championships as such. Alan, you've got Ohio State taking on Wisconsin. I've got Michigan State taking on Wisconsin. Who do you have as your overall winner of the Big Ten?
As much as it pains me to say this, I think Ohio State will win the Big Ten. I think Ohio State has a decent shot of making the playoffs. And hopefully, Jay, they're going to end the scoring drought for the Big Ten in the playoffs. They haven't scored any points since the 2014 national championship game.
All right, well, man, I've got Michigan State and Wisconsin, and I sat here and I talked up Michigan State and how I think they're going to get through all this or whatever. But I'm going to pull the swerve. I think Wisconsin snags them, win the Big Ten, and because I've got them with multiple losses, I'm playing my hand. I don't think the Big Ten champion is going to be in the playoff finals.
That's very interesting and provocative.
Which are two words never used in Wisconsin, just to be fair. Because, we want to do our three toughest game stretch. I want to go first on this one, though, because I think it's our buddies at Northwestern, man. They have a brutal 3-game stretch in the season. If you haven't looked at it, they play Wisconsin, Notre Dame, and at Iowa. I mean, that is going to be hard for Northwestern. They get to them at home, but that is no joke of a schedule.
No, that's definitely tough. I mean, Wisconsin's going to be one of the better teams in the conference. Notre Dame is set to have a pretty decent year, and Iowa is always salty, especially when you have to travel on the road. That's not an easy place to play. You kind of stole my thunder there, so I will audible slightly because I think that is the toughest 3-game stretch in the conference, hands down. I'll audible to the Michigan Wolverines. Now, granted, there is a bye week sandwiched in there, but on October 13th, they play Wisconsin. On the 20th, they travel to East Lansing and play Michigan State. They get an off week, and then they get Penn State at home. Those are 3 of the best teams in the entire conference. I know they got a bye week in there. You stole my thunder, bro. You're making me audible. But those 3 games, even with a bye week sandwiched in there, those are 3 of the best teams in the entire conference. So I think that'll be a tough stretch for Michigan.
I agree with you there. As a matter of fact, I would almost argue that's the reason I can't pick Michigan any higher than what I had them. We've mentioned some of the players to watch. You mentioned Michigan's Shea Patterson, the quarterback. I want to talk about a duo from Ohio State, J.K. Dobbins, the running back, and quarterback Dwayne Haskins. If Ohio State is going to prove me wrong and run this table and get back in the championship run and stuff like that, those 2 guys are going to have to make it happen, particularly Dobbins, because we've seen Urban Meyer coach around a quarterback that is explosive and one that isn't as explosive. The non-explosive ones, he just asks them to manage and be smart. But having a good running back matters, and Ohio State is loaded with them. Dobbins is fantastic.
No, I mean, Ohio State has the offensive playmakers. Dobbins led the comeback at Michigan after Barrett got hurt in that game. And here's the one knock that anybody would have on Barrett. And this would be most Urban Meyer quarterbacks, lack of a downfield passing game. Not true with J.K. Dobbins. That kid has a cannon.
Not Dobbins. You mean Haskins. Dobbins is the running back.
Haskins. Kid can throw it 50, 60 yards with ease. Then you have the duo in the backfield of Dobbins and
Weber. Yeah, everybody forgets about Mike Weber still sitting back there.
Everybody, the Bosa family is apparently blessed with good genes because they just have a second defensive lineman son named Nick, who's also just a nightmare on the line. Yeah. I mean, they have the athletes all over the place to match up with anybody in the country. The question is, are they going to be motivated for all their games? Are they going to come out flat on the road and get their tail whipped? And that's the only fear I have with this.
Well, that's what happened to them at Iowa. We'll see.
You talk about Michigan State. I'll give you a little stat I found, a little nugget I pulled out. So they had a defensive end named Kenny Wilecki last year, okay? He had 1 game experience coming into the season. He ended up getting a scholarship in the spring, okay? He led the defensive line with 73 tackles, 7 sacks, and 8 tackles for loss. Yeah. And that's how Michigan State operates. They just have these guys who end up going in the draft 2nd, 3rd round and end up being all pros, but they're just kind of jobbers. They're just kind of nobody. It reminds you of those Virginia Tech defenses for years and years and years.
Yeah, they do what teams like Virginia Tech does, what Oklahoma State does, what a lot of other teams that have done well do. They don't get like the big name guys. They may get 1 or 2, but they get these guys that have potential and they coach them up, and the guys hang around a long time. They play 3 or 4 or 5 years, and by the time they're done with their career, they're stud.
I think exactly what you're talking about is exactly why you see Iowa do this every few years. Yeah. Because let's face it, Alabama, at Clemson, at Ohio State, how many people are really sticking around for 4 and 5 years?
Yeah, not very many. Yeah, you guys are playing 3 years and they're gone.
And so when you get those upperclassmen with that experience, it does give you an edge. maybe not from an athletic standpoint, but from a mental standpoint and understanding the game and kind of some of the tricks of the trade.
Well, I mean, experience matters. It really does. And those teams' case, it has done well for. Well, we're joined now by Roger from Sports Radio Detroit, good friend of mine in the podcasting world. Roger, welcome into the Gridiron Breakdown.
Good to be here.
Absolutely, man. We brought you on to talk about Big Ten football, and I want to start with the two teams in your home state because I threw my man Allen a swerve over here a few minutes ago. I picked Michigan State to win the East. I think they're going to get ahead of Ohio State, but there's a ton of buzz around them and, of course, Michigan. What are you hearing and seeing up there? What are the chances one of them can really challenge Ohio State and Pitt?
Well, right now, with Michigan State going through a lot of the personal turmoil they've been going through right now, I don't think it's going to be a distraction, but you look at what Michigan State's been able to do in terms of a recruiting class and able to kind of their offensive line their offensive line is getting rebuilt, and Antonio did a really good job of that on the fly last year. But right now, it's really it depends what they get, the kind of production to get at quarterback, and for Michigan State, I think that's going to be the key because they every year they always somehow they have a running back that comes out of virtually out of nowhere and able to give them that kind of grind out defense, pound the ball, be able to be effective. But honestly, it's the quarterback play that Michigan State has been known for. I mean, you look at some of the guys that with Cousins, and they've been able to just consistently run the ball. And now with what they have a quarterback right now in the situation with they had last year, they were going through starters left and right, and now the stability is there right now with one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten in Brian Lewerke. And I think if he can go on what he did last year, I mean, he had a 59% completion percentage last year. This is a guy who honorable Big Ten selection, and if he can continue to grow as a quarterback, I think the state can give a good chance, really give a good run at Ohio State. And I think State right now over Michigan right now, heading into August, is the clear-cut favorite.
Well, my question is going to focus on Michigan, and I know y'all are probably tired of hearing. So what is the word up there? Media will have you believe that the natives are a little restless with Harbaugh. I know he had 2 10-win seasons and only 8 wins last year. But what are the expectations with Shea Patterson coming in? What does Harbaugh need to do this year, and does he need to beat Ohio State this year?
I think he does, and the expectations are a little high this year. But also, if you look at Michigan's schedule this year, I mean, you start opening night in South Bend. I mean, Notre Dame's consistently getting better every year. But, I mean, the last time that they've been there, they've combined for 6 points in the last 2 visits out there. So that's going to be a burden for Michigan. And after that, they got Nebraska, and then they go down and play a Northwestern team that's coming off a 10-3 campaign. So, then you have November with Penn State, with Trace McSorley. The schedule right now is just there. I think Michigan fans are already saying, well, we're going to have a tough schedule. So I think the excuses are kind of, already getting there. But the defense looks better. But, I mean, they have some guys who are coming in freshman-wise, too, that I really wanted to bring up. But they're going to have some guys that can step in right away. One of them being, really with Shea Patterson there, I think the next guy up really you hear a lot of hype about is Joe Milton. And this is a guy who is a freshman out of Orlando. Jim Harbaugh has been talking about him quite a bit. And this is a guy who might be next up after Shea Patterson. But a guy who they really think is going to come in as a freshman is Miley Sims at cornerback. And this is a 6'3", 175, 4-star recruit. And they are expecting some things out of him. So they think that as a freshman, he'll be able to contribute. So I think the excuses are ready to go. If I have one solid answer, but I think this year Michigan, as long as they make some step going forward, whether it's losing, I think Michigan's fans, if they win 9 games or 10 games, I think they'll consider that a success.
I got one more Michigan question real quick. I've been hearing this Kaliki Hudson kid compared to Jabril Peppers, that he might even be better than Peppers. Are you seeing that? I mean, is this guy as good as advertised?
Well, Ben, would you be able to answer that question?
Well, both these guys have different strengths. I mean, Peppers was really good. He was really fast, could cut on a dime, obviously. But Kaliki Hudson's much better in coverage. I mean, it took Jabril Peppers until his final season to get his first career interception at Michigan against Ohio State, literally waiting to the final game to do so. But Kaliki Hudson is as advertised. When you have 8 tackles for loss in a game. Granted, some people might say that's against Minnesota. Who cares? It's 8 tackles for loss in a game, which sets a Michigan record that hasn't been done before. Jabril Peppers hasn't done that. So Khaleke Hudson is pretty darn good at football.
Well, Ben, I want to jump off of that for a minute and switch over to the West, and so I'll start with you. This has been the Wisconsin show since we've realigned the divisions from the Legends and Leaders days. Every now and then, Iowa rises up for a run. Is this that year? If not the Hawkeyes, who's the toughest challenge in the West to the Badgers?
That's a great question. I mean, obviously what Coach Fitzgerald's doing at Northwestern, they still have a very good system there with the Wildcats, so they're always dangerous. I mean, last year they finished 7-2 in conference, 10-3 overall. They had an 8-game win streak. So Northwestern is a team that can compete with Wisconsin. Another team that comes out of the West that could compete in its second season under PJ Fleck is Minnesota. PJ Fleck always has that, trademark row the boat mentality. Well, he's bringing a new one to St. Paul and the Twin Cities. Basically, he wants to win the day. That's the new catchphrase that he's been using this season. So Minnesota might be another team that could dethrone Wisconsin, but when you have basically 4 out of those 5 guys on Wisconsin's front on the offensive line that are all Americans, it's going to be tough to unseat Wisconsin. But there's a couple of teams that could do it. Minnesota could do it. Iowa could do it. Northwestern, and a dark horse. Not saying that they're going to make too much noise, but Purdue under Jeff Brom. I mean, they took a major step in his first year, became bowl eligible in his first season. Purdue was very, very competitive in the non-conference game, or in the non-conference part of their season, I should say. But then when rubber hit the road in the Big Ten, they kind of came down to earth. But there's a lot of potential growth in West Lafayette with Purdue. Not saying they could do anything, but I think the reign of Wisconsin being always the representative out of the West is going to be coming to a head pretty soon, within 2 years. Because also, obviously, with Nebraska getting Scott Frost to come home, he quickly turned around UCF, a school that no one thought could do anything, and they beat Auburn, for Christ's sakes. So, I don't know if it's going to be this year or next year that someone unseats Wisconsin, but I can definitely see the tides kind of turning a little bit for the Badgers.
Cool. Yeah, you know what? You're talking about Purdue a little bit too, Ben, and to piggyback on that is the play of Elijah Sindelar, if I'm saying that correctly. But
Sindelar,
thank you, Sindelar. This guy played on a torn ACL. That's kind of the guts he was able to pull out last year, and that's the kind of play you get in the Big Ten there, and the big guy too in Iowa, Nathan Stanley, 6'5". This guy is potentially NFL written all over him, and if this is the guy who led the win over Ohio State, so I think with Stanley there, Iowa has, I think, to me at least, just a long shot opinion, but I think Iowa has a really good chance to really get Wisconsin out first place. But I mean, Wisconsin, they're not known for, they're known for their offensive line, and they're known for a good running game. And Jonathan Taylor, this guy was a beast. And I mean, this is a guy who, in the Orange Bowl is a freshman, and this is a guy who, with Hornbrook, was able to just be the difference maker. And Wisconsin continues this great tradition of good running backs. And I think with him there, it's going to be hard, but still, overall, I don't know. I think Iowa, to me, is a potential early favorite right now. But just their defense, and Ben, we talked about Iowa's defense last year a little bit. It's so inconsistent, but overall, I think they can give Wisconsin a good run for the money.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Iowa's always going to be a team that does it. Kirk Ferentz, always coached team, is very sound at football, and they do a good job in Des Moines. And plus, as we saw last year with Ohio State coming into Kinnick Stadium, Michigan the year before, good teams somehow always forget how to play football in Iowa City. I mean, it is what it is. That's something that the mystique of Kinnick Stadium in a night game atmosphere, it's insane. And plus, we saw Iowa fight tooth and nail against Penn State as well. Penn State needed a last-second touchdown from Trace McSorley to beat the Hawkeyes. So Iowa's always going to be there. They're that constant that's out of the West that can always give Wisconsin a run for their money. But I think the bottom of the West is going to be a little more competitive outside of Illinois. Illinois and I have no idea what they're doing under Lovie Smith. That team is honestly, I hate to say it because the Fighting Illini should just be called the Illini. They haven't had fighting in years. And I feel bad for the state of Illinois that you have to watch that product, but everyone else got better except for Illinois, and it's a shame because the Big Ten West for so long, as we know, has been dominated by Wisconsin.
And guys, we've kind of danced around this, but Ohio State, a lot of is expected from them this year. A lot of people predict them going to the playoffs. What is Ohio State's biggest hurdle to winning the division and winning the conference?
Their biggest hurdle? That's a really good question. Only because it's something that they have a couple of games that are going to be tough. One of their biggest hurdles is always going to be Michigan State. Mark D'Antonio, ever since he joined that program in 2007, in the time he's been there, has made Michigan State exceed expectations. But if we're looking at personnel, if we're looking at roster-wise, they lose 4-year starter JT Barrett. I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, you have J.K. Dobbins, you still have Mike Weber, you still have really good talent. And that's true. And plus we saw firsthand what Dwayne Haskins did to Michigan after JT Barrett got injured in the game last year on the road in the big house and still, found a way to win. But the thing that's going to be interesting about Ohio State is they're always going to be good. We know that they reload, but there's still a couple of games on their schedule that can easily trip them up. And obviously Michigan, except for in 2015, has fought Ohio State tooth and nail all season. So that game at the end of the season is going to be very, very interesting. And plus, you also play Penn State as your first Big Ten conference opponent on the road at State College. We know on September 29th, that's probably going to be a whiteout on national TV. And when you have a night game in Happy Valley, it's usually unhappy for the visitors. So there's a couple of things that can trip up Ohio State. It's college football. No one's ever going to be perfect. They're more kids than they are pro athletes. But again, it's also Ohio State. They're always usually the representative in the playoff for the Big Ten for a reason. They have really good coaching, and they have 5-star, 4-star talent across the board. They get their pick of the litter whenever they want.
The Big Ten East is considered one of the best division in all of college football. And if you look at, Phil Steele has said this, you have 4 legitimate national title contenders in Ohio State, Michigan State, and Penn State. And, look, Maryland, Rutgers, we can laugh and we can joke about them being slouches, and they are, for rightfully so. But, DJ Durkin has done a really good job of rebuilding Maryland. And Rutgers is not a joke. They're not becoming they're stepping away from the joke title, but Ohio State on the defensive line, Bosa just really really nails it down. But their secondary, I think, is where I think Ohio State might be exposed. And so I think with Michigan making some upgrades to the secondary, I think that's where Ohio State can be beatable. Is through the air. They can stop the run really well, but I think I'm curious to see what Ohio State can do against some really prolific quarterbacks. They have one with Penn State and Michigan State. I still haven't seen Shane Patterson enough to see that, but still, Ohio State's going to have their hands full against some really good quarterbacks.
Well, us being in the SEC, we've both seen Shea Patterson up close at Ole Miss, and he is a legit dynamic football player. I'm curious to see what he looks like in the Harbaugh offense, because what Hugh Freeze was doing and what Harbaugh generally does, not exactly from the same tree, but a dynamic player can really push the ball down the field, and that's what matters. And Alan brought it up earlier. It's one thing you don't see a ton of at Ohio State is down the field passing. Dwayne Haskins have that element, so we'll see if they can rope it in. Guys, we're kind of at the end of our segment here, so we're asking all of our guests this. Give us your college football playoff Final Four. You don't have to break it down all the way to the championship, but what 4 teams you think will be standing at the end of 2018?
All right. Well, based off what if I'm going off from last year, I'm going to go with Alabama. I'm going to go Ohio State. I'm going to go I'm talking the ACC here. Let me think about that for a quick second. I'll get back to the ACC, but I think Auburn and I'm trying to think of the ACC though. I'm drawing a blank on that. But
Clemson?
I think Clemson. Yeah, Clemson's good. I think Clemson. Clemson or, yeah, I'm going to go with Clemson right now. Just the ACC always brings it. They bring it recently, and I think they'll make another run for it. But I think right now, off the top of my head, in the middle of this, in the summertime, those are the four I'm going to go with.
Well, for me, my four is going to be a little bit different. Obviously, Alabama, last year they got a gift and they got in on their name alone, and they took advantage of it and won a national championship. Hats off to Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide for doing that. I don't think they need luck to do that this year. They should be able to get in no problem. Coming out of the Big Ten, though, only because this has to be the year that Michigan does it. Michigan's going to be the representative, I think, out of the Big Ten, and it's going to come down to that final week against Ohio State to see who gets in. Kind of like in 2016, Michigan's going to go into that game. They didn't, have any fear playing in the horseshoe, and the offensive line riddles for Michigan should be solved by then. So I say Michigan could definitely be the representative in the playoff. And then you have to look in the ACC only because Clemson's going to have some drop off a little bit. So I don't know if Clemson's going to necessarily be there again. From right now, I'm just going to say Clemson, but my quick backup plan to that is Florida State. Francois is going to be healthy. So that's going to be helpful. And there's going to be a team out of the Big 12 that I think is going to not miss a beat without Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma is going to be very, very good coming out of the Big 12. And that final spot is going to be really tough to get because I don't really see anyone necessarily coming out of the Pac-12 to claim a college football playoff spot, in all honesty. I think, again, the SEC could get two teams because the SEC is that dominant. And I'm not just saying that because we're on an SEC podcast. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, anything, that you've seen within the SEC the past 4 years has been incredible. So I could easily see a team like Auburn or something like that claiming a spot as well. But my four, just again, as a recap, would be Alabama, Michigan, safe play of Clemson, and then Oklahoma representing, I guess, a team from beyond the great Mississippi River.
All right. Well, guys, it has been a blast. We'll definitely try to hook up again in the season because the Big Ten's got a lot of great football. We talk about all of the college football across the nation. But tell folks a little bit about Sports Radio Detroit, what you guys have got going on, and how folks can find you on the interweb. All
right. Well, you can go to our website, sportsradiodetroit.com. And currently right now we're doing basically it's been next episode of Over Under Fair we just did was we talked about the WWE Attitude Era. We have a new episode of Tigers coming out tomorrow, actually, as we're recording tonight. As we analyzed the Dodgers and Orioles trade. We looked a little bit about what the Orioles got back in return, if it was worth of anything. Tigers got a call up that came up this weekend, and we have a new podcast rolling out. We're covering e-gaming, and that's going to be coming out in the next couple days or so as well. So, and Ben, is there any written content we got coming out?
There'll be a couple written content, but where you can find us, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, anywhere that you want to look for podcasts, all you really have to do is search Sports Radio Detroit. We're there. Facebook, same thing, Sports Radio Detroit. You can find us, like us, leave a comment. And then on Twitter, Sports Radio, it's at Sports Radio DET.
Fantastic. Guys, thanks so much, both Roger and Ben, joining us from Sports Radio Detroit here on the Gridiron Breakdown. Good talking some Big Ten football with you guys, and we'll hope to have you on later on in the season.
Thanks, guys. Pleasure.
To recap what our picks were, you picked Ohio State and Wisconsin to win the divisions. I picked Michigan State and Wisconsin. You've got the Buckeyes from Ohio State winning the Big Ten. I've got Wisconsin in an upset.
The Big Ten has really taken steps forward over the last 5 or 6 years.
Well, I think that is a fair assessment, and it has been a lot of fun talking Big Ten. But next week, my man, here on the Gridiron Breakdown, it's time to go out west. It's time to talk about the Big 12. Until next time, for Alan, I'm Jay. You've been listening to the Gridiron Breakdown.
Thank you for listening to the Gridiron Breakdown. Tune in next week for another show. The information discussed in the Gridiron Breakdown is for entertainment purposes only and is not officially connected to the NCAA or any other college football teams discussed.